I'd like to introduce today's presenters. Sandy Surkes is CEO and founder of Valora Technologies, and Jennifer Nelson is the VP of Marketing and Business Development at Valora Technologies. So ladies, I'll turn it over to you now to start the webinar.
Great, thanks very much. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm just going to give you just a little bit of 5-minute infomercial here about kind of who we are and what we do before I hand it over to Sandy. Again, as mentioned, Sandy Surkes is the president and CEO of Valora Technologies. I'm VP Marketing Business Development. It's very nice to see you this afternoon, and I see a lot of familiar faces, so welcome. For those who are not familiar with Valora Technologies, we are an auto-classification platform that allows businesses to find, identify, and action content regardless of where it lives across the enterprise. We bring with us a technology stack, which is enterprise-grade SaaS platform. We bring 20 years of expertise and best practices from our team to yours. And with our client group, we work with usually Fortune 50, Fortune 500 companies, and really act as an extension of their team as well. Sandy,
sorry, I had to find the mute button. There we go. Unmute button.
Unmute.
So I did the little graphic a split second ahead. Since we're going to be talking about data privacy and records at the same time, this kind of reminded me of, are you all ready to walk and chew gum? So that's what we're going to do today. I'll get it. All right. So how to manage data privacy while managing records. There's my guy. All right.
There he is.
Okay. So as Jen said, this is what we're going to cover today. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. We're just going to get right into it. So in order to bring data privacy and records together, we have to make sure that we understand what we're talking about. And I kind of learned data privacy just kind of living it in the industry. Many of you probably the same. I thought it would be helpful for us all to get on the same page with what exactly is data privacy from a records point of view. So the first thing to kind of look at is information governance in general. If IG is the umbrella that covers all of these areas, there has been a lot of convergence of late. First, e-discovery and records kind of came together. That was maybe 5-6 years ago. Then we realized, hey, same type of dynamic would be helpful for knowledge management, contracts, HR, other areas that were keeping large amounts of content under their domain. And now along comes data privacy, which I tend to view as the youngest sister in a set of sisters, because these are all kind of sister type disciplines, and they benefit from that familial bond. So here are my incredible drawing skills. If we started with records as kind of the eldest sister, along came e-discovery as kind of the second sister. I've got a little bit of a Little Women theme going on here. And then KM and those other areas. And then along comes data privacy in what I call the happy InfoGov house. Here's everybody. And that's important because they really aren't silos that exist independent of one another. There is a lot of commonality, and ever more so. That's going to be very apparent in the rest of this webinar. Okay, so what is data privacy really from a records and information management perspective? Broadly, data privacy is considered the right to control how your own personal information is collected and used by others. This is a relatively new concept in the United States, although it's been a concept both in law and in practice in other parts of the world for a very long time. It's new to the US, and most of the presentation today has an American-centric focus. Although data privacy is a worldwide activity, we will from time to time look at what happens in other places because they affect our business practice here in the United States. So as the technology advances and data gathering opportunities become more sophisticated, more personalized and invasive, of course, the desire to control that increases. We are effectively in an arms race with the ability to collect information on us and the ability to restrict that activity. So, and you see that playing out right now. So we have basically, at least here in the US, we have reached what I would call the crossover threshold. That is the we're now paying attention threshold. There have been enough data breaches, enough blatant kind of revelations in the media that we are now demanding regulatory action in a way that Americans typically never have in the past. And so with that coming regulation onslaught, there is a much greater, I really liked this phrase from the IAPP. We're going to be talking about IAPP quite a bit throughout this webinar. If you're not familiar with that organization, go check them out. There is just a wealth of information on data privacy. But they coined the term risk matrix. In other words, what are all the risk dimensions that your organization needs to be responsible for? And so, of course, the larger the organization, the more of the risk you're going to have. The more sensitive content you will hold, the more you're likely to use that information in different manners. The more areas where you're likely to do business are just going to contribute to that complexity. And of course, the locations, meaning countries and country boundaries, all of that contributes to the explosion of risk. Why do we phrase it that way? Because risk really gets attention, and that is why records management exists in the first place, to reduce risk. And so data privacy is also there to reduce risk, more to reduce somebody else's risk, but they share that kind of risk reduction umbrella along with legal. So the happy InfoGov house, not so happy anymore. I would call it the risky InfoGov house. We are just adding and adding and adding risk into the picture. That is by not complying or not, handling this information properly. Obviously, we can de-risk, and that's, if you were at my presentation at the MER conference, we talked a lot about de-risking. This is a good example of that. So in case somehow you missed it, there's been just a plethora of data privacy regulations. GDPR really kind of the granddaddy of them, but not, interestingly, not the first, but the one that really had the impact. And it is the one that many of the coming regulations model themselves after. So if you're not familiar with GDPR, by all means, check it out or contact me. Thought for everybody on this call, maybe we want to do a webinar on GDPR. I'd be happy to assist with that. Here in the United States, there is no federal law. Most people find that shocking, but given kind of what the political environment is these days, it has been left to the states. So what you see on screen right now, these are federal regulations, but they are very industry specific. Anything that is generally for personal well-being is being handled at the state level. And just to give you a feel for how much activity is really going on here, so GDPR went live in 2018, and so you can see the massive growth in data privacy legislation that is underway right now. In fact, there's only a handful of states that don't have some kind of bill pending or discussion going. And what's really interesting is this is one of the few areas of legislation where you practice your business or where your business is headquartered doesn't actually matter. It's the people that you're serving, where they are, that matters. So that's one of the big things that GDPR brought to the table, which is you can be a US business based in the US in, I'll pick Oklahoma, but if you have clients who are buying your goods and services from the EU, then they are protected by GDPR. So you may think, I'm an American company, I'm in Oklahoma, I'm good. You are not good. You have customers from those locations, and you have to respond to those data privacy regulations. The same thing happens in the United States. You might be in a state with no data privacy regulation like Wyoming, but you have clients in one of the more restrictive ones like California or Connecticut, and you have to obey the laws that those people live under in their jurisdictions. This is a big change, and it requires knowing things like, what is my client's jurisdiction? What is my patient's jurisdiction? So that you can even answer the question, are we subject to blah-de-blah regulation? So what's happening is we are kind of lifting the digital curtain. Again, I spoke quite a lot about this at the MER conference. This is just a quickie digest. But basically, we are kind of becoming aware that here in the United States, we have been kind of unknowingly, unwittingly behind a digital curtain that was designed intentionally to obscure what organizations were collecting from us, why, and how, and for how long. As we became aware of those rights and what was going on, we are starting to demand disclosure and the ability to protect our own information. So that is what's happening. That follows the GDPR model. And I'll give you some examples of changes that have already started to play out. There are certain industries that have what are called know your customer requirements, or KYC, where they are required to validate that it is in fact the person who claims that they are before you can conduct business with them. You see this a lot in financial services, so that somebody can't claim to be you and say, yes, I'd like to take out all my funds now, please. Why don't you just put them over here? They have to know the customer to be able to validate. So those are examples of data privacy regulation kind of playing out in various industries. Another one is the subtle shift that's been going on from opting out of spam email and everything else to opting in. That one's more of a best practices as opposed to regulation, but it is starting to change, and we'll talk about that more when we get to the purpose discussion. So the ramifications of this kind of awareness, this new regulation, particularly on the records management profession, is that this is no longer just a European thing. This is a US thing, and it is an excellent opportunity to bring the lessons that the records management community has learned over its decades of existence so that privacy doesn't fall on its face. Because there is a lot at stake in managing and analyzing and protecting large swaths of content. That is an expertise that records management brings to the table. The alignment between the two of them comes around not just understanding, yeah, we have this stuff and I think it's over there, but knowing what it actually contains. This type of regulation, this type of movement around data privacy requires that you literally know what it is. And so that, of course, is the siren call for AutoClassification in case you needed one. What is really starting to happen is this convergence around the content itself, as opposed to the disciplines. I'm in records management, I'm in data privacy. If you kind of turn that on its head and say, this is the content, what disciplines are required of it? That is the focus that's starting to happen. Okay. Oops, we're a little bit backwards here. Oh well. Okay, so what are data privacy rights? I'll kind of focus you over to the left. Those are the top three. Access, rectification, and removal are the top three data privacy actions that a data subject, a person, can take. So access means saying to an organization, I'd like to know what you have on me. Tell me what you have on me. That one's very, very common. The second one, also very common, rectification. I would like to fix the information that you have on me. This is a true story. It happened to me earlier this week. I wanted to have my husband do something with my Costco account, and I had to get on the phone, and they literally asked me what was my telephone number in 1992 when I had signed up for the first time for a Costco card. And I had to really think back. Did I have a cell phone? Where was I living? What the heck was my phone number? And that was the number that they had on file for me. And as my children tell me all the time, the 90s were not 10 years ago. So rectification, an example of rectification. And when I said to her, after I finally figured out which phone number it had to be, I said, can I please change that to my current cell phone number? And her answer was, no, that's the file. Like, so if I ever need to do anything again, I'm going to have to remember that again. That is technically in violation of rectification laws in data privacy. The third bucket, removal, is the one we all know. That's the right to be forgotten. please delete what you have on me. Those are the three biggies that data subjects that people can ask for, and they can ask for any combination of them. There are some others. These are they. The restriction means I want you to only have this kind of data, or only in these kind of circumstances, or only these type of people. An example of that is you can have my husband's cell phone number, but only in an emergency. Example. Portability, we know this from our cell phones, is I'm able to take my information with me as I change carriers or change providers. And opt-in, again, we talked about that one, opt-in as opposed to opt-out. So these are the rights that are generally found in data privacy regulation. Every regulation is slightly different, but the kind of smart approach that most organizations are taking is to have a broad brush data privacy response that covers these 6 generally. And that would be my recommendation as well. If you are showing good faith on these 6 areas, you're going to be in good shape. The emerging
there's a question from the group. Does this also apply to not-for-profit entities?
Yes, it does. It applies to all entities storing data. That would include religious, educational, you name it. It might even count for things that are kind of casual, like clubs and, just organizations you might belong to casually. If the information is being stored, then it is subject to this because the rights accrue to the individual, not the organization. The organization must respond because of the individual's rights. So it's pretty much any association if there's data involved. So that takes us actually to this next big topic, which is purpose. The early data privacy laws are a little bit light on purpose. The later ones, and particularly ones that involve like know your customer and things like that, this is starting to become a hot area. And I expect this type of language to show up here on out. So purpose is really why. Why do you have this data? Why are you collecting it in the first place? What are you going to use it for? And tell me every possible use, not just the one you think I want to hear. You must disclose all uses, even uses you didn't quite think of. You better make sure that you're in alignment. And when will you get rid of it? Under what circumstances? So I will give you some examples. Again, this was a wonderful topic at the MER conference, just on kind of data purpose. And so I'll give you 2 examples of violations. One is, and I don't know whether it was Uber Eats or some other delivery like Uber Eats, that puts on the front of its app, says, we are going to collect your cell phone data so that the delivery person can get in touch with you. Great. And what they don't say is, and so they've given me what they're going to do and why, so they can get in touch with me. But what they didn't say is why else, and how long are you going to keep that data? If I have ordered my pizza and the pizza has arrived and I've given, I've paid, the transaction is complete. Technically, there's no reason to continue having my cell phone number. And I don't know, did Uber Eats or whomever get rid of my cell phone number? Did they put it in their database for marketing purposes? Do they know it's me next time I call and they go, hey, did you want a pizza, Sandy? Okay, so you see what I mean about blurring of purpose? That is already starting to become a big no-no. So think about your organizations when you collect data from customers, from patients, from employees. What exactly is the reason that you're collecting that data? Be very careful of a kind of marketing type response, which is, well, it might be useful someday. Be very careful of that because that is not an explicit purpose, and that's going to get you in trouble with some of this regulation. So the other thing to watch out for is your organization talking out of both sides of its mouth? So here's the second example. I don't remember which organization was collecting information on clients and what they purchased and what they looked at. It was some sort of retail. And marketing was keeping 5 years worth of data. So 5 years of your purchasing history and your browsing history, et cetera. and clearly mention that we will be keeping your information. They had a privacy policy, blah, blah, we'll be keeping your information for only 5 years. Okay, for 5 years. Okay, great. Now they have kind of in the back room, they have their data science department mining that data, looking for trends. What is everybody buying? What is Sandy buying, et cetera. And the data science folks were using only 2 years of data because they found that to be the most relevant. They were ignoring the other 3 years. And that set up legal justification to say, you don't need it for 5 years. You're really only using 2 years. Your groups are at odds with each other and you're not using the data in fashion with each other. I don't have all the details on this, but that was my understanding of the gist of this. I'll try to find the exact reference and get it to you guys. In any case, you understand what I'm saying, which is different points of view, different uses of data may actually conflict with each other. So that sets up an inherent issue for data minimization approaches. So what's data minimization? Generally, this is a very hot topic, as you guys saw in the poll, something that most IG organizations are trying to do, actually delete stuff that has passed retention, removing rot, doing file share cleanups, getting rid of duplicates. All of those things would kind of fall lightly into data minimization. The other big area of data minimization is data as it's being created. Again, per purpose. Do you need to keep this at all? And if so, for how long? And how will you ensure that you do so? So you can kind of see this conflict between either not knowing the purpose of content or having kind of messy, blurry, multiple purposes. This is what needs to get fleshed out because the regulation is starting to demand that you comply both with stating the purpose and then, of course, meeting it.
Again, there's a question from the, sorry for interrupting, a question from the group. Is there an emerging actual permissioned use or ownership of personal data? That's the promise of Web 3.0 is the comment.
Yes, there is a notion of that. I am not an authority in that area, but yes, that is generally what people are hoping will take hold. The issue for everybody on this phone call is the last 30 years of business activity where we didn't do that. And that is what will show up in a litigation matter, in a DSAR, what have you. So yes, that is starting to happen where people are controlling what is provided about them. And there are third party, almost like a credit bureau type of situation where you give your info there and the reasons, the rationales at which the third party may distribute it, and then vendors or people you might want to buy from go through there. So eventually that's going to happen, but we have an awful lot of messy cleanup to do until that becomes the day-to-day reality. So finally, you're going to hear this a lot. If you need to know specifically what you have and why you have it, you are really just ringing AutoClassification's bells. That is the way to do so. Yes, hopefully some humans somewhere know, but there's no way any one person is going to know across the organization, nor have the ability to tag, petabytes of data with that rationale. That's a hard tagging effort. Again, why you might want to automate that, and of course, what this webinar is going to be about ultimately. Okay, so in general, this is what an organization, again, any organization, is responsible for regarding data privacy. What do we have? Where is it located? Who has access to it? Are we handling this properly? What might not be 100% perfect? Do we even know? And the biggest offender, you guys probably know this, are MISC file shares or MISC SharePoint sites, your unstructured data sources that have been in use for years, decades, or worse, have been abandoned. Those are just piled up risk mountains. And then, of course, can I produce the information in a timely fashion when the request is being made? So basically, this is what the organization is responsible for regarding data privacy. This should sound very familiar to the 70% of you who are in records management on this call. You've heard this language before, it just didn't have the word sensitive in it. Does this sound familiar? Just take the word sensitive out. What do we have? Where is it located? Who has access? Are we handling it right? Are we compliant with our record retention schedule? What's out there that shouldn't be? And can I produce relevant information when a request is made, whether it's an internal request, an investigation, e-discovery, HR, pick your request rationale, knowledge management. This is the same kind of thing. It just has the word sensitive data stuck in there, and sensitive data is a subset of all your data. So you're starting to see the overlap between the two groups. So each of them has a need to look at these questions and be able to answer them quickly. And so if you think of records management as, again, that big sister to data privacy, records management really needs to kind of take data privacy under its wing and say, we got you. We're already analyzing our content for all these purposes. Now we'll do yours too. So this is what we mean about doing data privacy. As long as you're doing records anyway, which you should be, just throw one more log on the fire, the data privacy log. So here's a little bit of what that looks like on a kind of nuts and bolts level. So these are the typical kind of, we'll call them rotten retention, records type of classification tags. These should look familiar to most of you. Is it rot, yes or no? Over at Valora, we go into a lot more detail, exactly what kind of rot and how many kinds of rot. Why do you care about that? One, it's a lot easier to make those slice and dice, keep, don't keep decisions. And two, it helps address that purpose question, okay? Why do you have that? Well, if it's rot, it's easy to say, oh, it's rot, it's rot, just throw it out. There may be good reasons why you have some of that rot. You may want to know more granular detail. AutoClassification is going to help you do that generally, give you granular detail, and this rot yes, no versus rot detail, great example of that. Obviously, is it a dupe? Again, some granularity here. There are multiple levels of dupes. You can be an identical dupe, what we call a hash dupe. You can be a similar document, 99% the same, but one tiny thing different, and so on down the line. Record class, you all know. Expiration date or retention disposition date, the period, and of course, what is to happen when that date arrives. So these are the kind of typical records type classification tags, which you're doing one way or another. Possibly you're still doing this manually. Possibly you're still asking your employees, God help them, to do this. Better answer, you're doing this with some sort of automation. So now, how do we layer in the data privacy piece? So these are the data privacy tags. So again, you're going to see that kind of personal data high level. Does it contain PD, personal data, yes or no? And what type of personal data is in there? Does it contain PII? If it contains PII, what kind of PII? Is it date of birth SSN? Or is it, that it's a minor? You're going to do something different with those, I hope. And so, getting into that granular detail. One of the things that's not on here, because it's not usually a tag, it's more of an action, is the anonymization or pseudonymization. Forget it, you know what I'm trying to say. Pseudonymization of data. The difference being one is truly making it anonymous, the other is hiding the information, but still being able to get at it if you have to. So those are actions that you would take if you had to comply in your industry, but you would have to know, of course, that kind of data is present. Again, we're getting into the what is it actually, what's its purpose, what does it say, what does it contain? Those are all kind of calling cards for classification, generally auto classification. So some of the other things that data privacy brings to the table, obviously, what type of personal data is present and is there any present. Things like sensitivity. How dangerous is this? It's one thing to have my shoe size. It's another thing to have my bank account. And so that is an example of sensitivity. Most organizations are starting to have a sensitivity policy. It's very similar to a records retention schedule. It's a sensitivity schedule that dictates what constitutes, kind of public information versus confidential versus highly confidential. Again, if anybody's interested in that, of course, we have exemplars for those types of policies. Just let Jen or me know. We're happy to supply those. The other thing that you tend to see in privacy classification tags are about the person. So an employee information, very common, customer, patient. And that's where it can get, it's by definition going to be in the personal data category, but also not necessarily subject to, if a person says, hey, I want you to forget everything you have on me. Well, if you're an employee, I don't just forget about you because you asked me to. That is part of our record. And you start to see some of the tension. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Okay, so the way those requests occur, they're generally called DSARs. That's the term in GDPR, and it tends to be the term that I use. You'll also hear them called data requests, subject requests, subject access requests, and like every permutation of this. What it is someone asking for one of those basic 6 rights, at least one of them. And so this is what it looks. So here are those rights, which again, subject to purpose. Here comes the guy, delete my data, please. Go, delete me. So that kicks off, in most organizations, that kind of kicks off a flurry of activity of more or less organized chaos, starting with the data privacy folks saying, okay, it's been received, the clock is ticking. Most situations, 45 days, some are 30, some are longer. We have, but a point is, a finite window in which to respond. So off goes the request, typically to records, go get me everything you have on Mr. Guy here. And so what does that involve? Okay, I'm gonna go search everything we have. Oh, wait, some are records. We need to keep those. Legal hold says, timeout, please. Some of those is under legal hold. We can't just delete that. And you start to see the kind of the maelstrom, right? Of this push and pull between yes, forget it, don't forget it. Yes, forget it, don't forget it. This is the same push and pull we've seen before without the green segment. This is the push and pull that already exists between records and legal hold, where record says, hey, this is up for deletion, it's past retention, it's time to get rid of this, and legal hold says, no, you don't, it's under legal hold. So there's that tension there, and record says, okay, you just let me know when that's off legal hold, which happens every day of the week, right? And so that tension exists. Now we're gonna wedge a third tension in there, which is the rights of the person, not within the organization, outside the organization, to say, I would like you to forget me. So that sets up kind of an interesting conflict. Okay. And this is that these practice areas or these activities must coexist and must coexist happily. So DSARs, everybody in records needs to know this. DSARs are going to upset or interfere with your normal retention. And how are they going to do that? On the basis of purpose. So you may have, on the one hand, you have a records retention schedule. Everybody views that as sacrosanct. It's been in place for 10 years, whatever. And along comes purpose that says, we're only going to keep data as long as we absolutely have to. How does that jive with your records retention schedule? And then furthermore, along comes Mr. Guy saying, forget me now, please. Doesn't really matter about purpose, doesn't really matter unless it's really a record and it's within your purpose. Who's on top here? And this is what is starting to play out now. In the example, like those examples of, you said you'd keep my data for 30 minutes, but you're keeping it longer. Things like this. Who supersedes who? Okay? Can a DSAR supersede normal rot removal or normal retention schedule? Yes. And so it's going to be up to your legal team to determine when that is the case and when not. And now we have a three-way nightmare between records, legal hold, and the DSAR itself. And okay, I hope you haven't fainted out there, but just to really hit you while you're down, the resolution of that three-way conflict is different in different jurisdictions. If you're in the EU and let's say the former employee says, I would like you to forget about me, and they're talking about an email that's not under legal hold, they are going to win against retention, even if your policy is you keep email X number of years. They are going to win that. In the US, it's up for grabs. And so what we're setting up is a lot of it depends kind of situation. And it depends is when you want to have rules. If this condition, if that condition, then take this action. Those of you who have heard me speak before recognize that. That's an auto classification calling card, because it is literally, that's how that is done. It follows rules. And so that is what you want to look for, is what are the circumstances that could arise and what are the outcomes that should happen, and then automate that. So how do we do it? Okay. Obviously, auto classification. And just so everybody knows, this is not a presentation on auto classification. I'm going to go through it super fast just so you get a tiny little taste. If you want to really understand auto classification in depth, by all means, please come to Valora's website, follow this link. There's webinars, white papers, you name it, information galore about auto classification. So I am going to now go give a super fast definition, probably the fastest I've ever done. And I'm a New Yorker, so I could talk fast. Ready, go. All right, how does auto classification work? It is software algorithms that go through and read or parse the content inside files. They create a rich set of metadata that answers a lot of important questions like, what is this? Where does it live? Who is it intended for? What kind of information is contained in it? Usually 50 or 60 fields of metadata tags. Using those tags, we create rules that dictate how to manage this file based on what it is and its purpose. So if it's a blah, 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 it's record class X, it needs to be kept this long, it has this type of personal data in it, it's subject to these requirements, step away, have a nice day. That is how auto classification works. These are the types of tags that you can get, and on and on and on. Pulls it right out of the content itself, and then follows rules. Here's an example of a retention rule, very simple. Again, that if-then activity, if it meets XYZ PDQ, then do this. And that sets up, of course, enterprise-wide information governance. There you go, auto classification in 5 seconds.
Now, that was a record, Sandy.
I hope people understood any 6 words out of that. If not, again, come to our website. I guarantee you there's a lot more there. So this is what it sort of functionally looks like. This is what we call a URL. It's a mortgage application for property in the United States. It is just covered with personal data. And what the software does is go through and find all of it and say, there's an SSN here. There are some warning signs. Why is their name a warning sign? Because it says title will be held in what name, implying that Brady and Wilma are going to live at this address. So that's what we mean by likely PII. It's going to become PII as soon as it discovers the doc type, URL, and the address. Now their names become PII. They weren't on their own. So clear PII, home phone number, date of birth. There are things that are not PII. Don't fall for simplistic type of classification. Says, I found a number. Because it's a number doesn't mean it's PII. Just because it follows the sequence of an SSN doesn't mean it's an SSN or a credit card. You need to be more sophisticated than that. And while you're at it, All those, remember I said the other sisters in the house? This is, of course, what data privacy wants to know. But knowledge management, contracts management, there's something else they want to know, right? They want to know, well, what else you got in there? Who is the contract between and how long is it for? And, what are the terms, right? That's valuable stuff. And of course, this sets up the obvious economy of scale. If you're going to be analyzing your content for any purpose, analyze it for all purposes. It's much cheaper. As long as you're in there setting up a system, get as much information as you can and cover the whole house, cover all the disciplines at once. Instead of buying 4 systems, 5 systems, buy one system that's going to do all of them and grab all the metadata you need for any reason. All right, sorry, this is just going to keep on going here. Okay. So here's another example, and this comes from one of our employees at Valora who was kind enough to share this true life example with us, and that would be Jen. And this is a file that literally sits on her computer, which means it is in part of Valora's corporate data. We have a file called scott.jpg. Great, very helpful. What on earth is that? No other information. So is it responsive to records? Is it responsive to e-discovery? Is it responsive to data privacy? Let's find out. I got nothing from the file name. Oh, it's a passport of a minor, also Jen's son. Okay, yeah, I would say there's some personal data there, and there's a lot that we need to cover off. So what does AutoClassification do? Well, first of all, it's going to recognize the type of document. It's a passport. It's going to recognize it's related to Canada. So what are data privacy laws in Canada? And of course, it knows that Valora is in the United States. And so there are laws in the US about managing this data, and there are laws in Canada about Scott as a person, and also his mother, because he is a minor. Okay, you get the point of where I'm going. So what do we want to pull out of all of this? This is the AutoClassification going pull, 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 and then make that determination. That's that rules that we use the term disposition as well. It's not just a records term, but it means what is the kind of final standing of this file. It includes records. In this case, it includes a heck of a lot of data privacy activity. This is what we would call a red flag. So now let's look at the whole thing in action. So along comes the DSAR request. How does it work in a fully automated way? Well, instead of picking up the phone and calling the legal department saying, yeah, I'd like you to forget about me, please, the subject, the data subject, might go to a website, fill out a form. What exactly is it you want to know or you want to take place on you? Submit. And then what happens is that's going to be received, automatically parsed for, okay, this is the person, they were a former employee, blah, blah, blah. Here's their information. Here's what they want to take place. That gets mapped against the previously analyzed content sources for a match. And then the matches are put forth as a data report. Somebody in legal is probably going to want to review that. An exception for whatever might be exceptions. And then a DSAR report, which is this is what is going to be prepared automatically to send out to the data subject. So this is a gross oversimplification of what happens, but I wanted you guys to see the automated nature of this from top to bottom. What is implicit in this model that you're looking at is that there is a content classification and auto classification step somewhere in there before this goes out to the data subject. So a recommendation, and having lived this now for a couple of years, is that you want to auto classify your unstructured data, your file shares, your SharePoint sites, your email. You want to auto classify that ahead because that takes kind of a while, and you want to make sure you have that house in order, as well as your records house, again, similarly in order for the same data. So you do that in advance. Whereas things that are structured content, usually you can query that pretty quickly on the fly. Not as critical to have that done in advance. That can sometimes happen on the fly, depends on the nature of that structured content. So you get the tiny little reprieve there. But for your massive piles of unstructured content, you do want to classify those in advance so that you can respond to the DSAR typically within hours. Just to give you a flavor. All right, so this kind of takes us kind of into the end game of the presentation today, which is, okay, I get it, I understand how it works. How am I going to get this to happen in my organization? And the answer is to start with a pilot. So a pilot use case is typically a small contained set of data, a small constrained set of requirements. Maybe we'll do the first 5 record classes out of your retention schedule, and we'll look for basic PII, SSN, date of birth, home residence, cell phone, that kind of thing, and have that be a pilot, because it's a crossover between records and privacy. You're going to work together on that, and I recommend that you find a crossover data set, something like HR files. HR files are going to be both records and have a lot of data privacy in them. So if you're looking for a pilot use case, that's the one. Make sure you get the buy-in from legal. If those if privacy and records for whatever reason don't report up through legal, make sure you get legal involved. They're going to add heft to the decision to do this. Legal has a very vested interest in promoting this type of solution because it is, again, de-risking the organization, and that is their #1 goal. So look for the pilot use case. Looking forward, always having, kind of the eye on the future. If you're going to do HR, maybe you do the most recent acquisition, or you just do one branch, or you just do one office, looking forward to eventually the entire HR population, or in fact, maybe the entire corporate population. Measure your results. And this is a really easy one. Imagine you had a DSAR come in tomorrow, Joe Jones, former employee. How would you go about fulfilling that DSAR? What would you have to do, and how long will it take you? I would recommend you do the fire drill and see and measure it. Write down how long it took from the moment you were told go till you had a beautiful DSAR report ready to deliver to Joe Jones. My guess is if you don't have these kind of systems in place, it will probably take you several weeks, if not months, to conduct that. Then as you do that pilot, compare it. It shouldn't take you more than maybe 2 hours with the pilot. And you can show that as a drastic ROI. And it's a drastic de-risking, which is kind of the calling card for 2023. So it's very, very easy to show the improvement and the ROI that these type of approaches bring. And then, of course, build on that success and expand out. Once you have a working model on your pilot, let's say that is on the first 5 record classes, it's very easy to build that out to all the record classes. So just keep building on that. When you do a pilot, it should be a working system that you can just grow from. And then finally, I can't say this enough, spread the word. In my experience, records folks tend to be a little bit shy about their accomplishments and what they're doing. They just want to do their record, kind of leave me alone. And you really do need to put out the successes out there because they are dramatic, both in terms of cost savings, effort savings, and risk reduction. Those are huge goals of any organization, and they wouldn't exist unless records made them happen. You shouldn't be shy about that. So that takes us to the end with about 6 minutes to go for questions. Jen?
Yes, we do have one question. I've been kind of answering some as they've come up. Question is there a formal time frame one must respond to a DSAR?
It depends a little bit where the data subject is coming from, but a good rule of thumb to use is 30 days. That, I believe, is the most restrictive of any that I have heard. And again, because in this country, we're going to wind up with 50, all right, maybe 47 different data privacy laws, you want to aim for the most restrictive, and then the rest will be covered. So if you can aim to respond in 30 days, it will be a walk in the park to have to respond in 45. Sometimes 60, I've heard 90, but 30 is the most restrictive that I have ever heard.
Excellent. And let me open this Q&A. Yeah, and the other questions that we have answered along the way. I think I did see a question in the chat, which I think we've already covered. The question was, if there was a subject access request to delete a record type, like a background check, before the official retention period is up, can the record be deleted? Or does the SAR request trump the official retention period? And it was a request, a European request.
Generally, the record status of that is going to trump the request. That's by and large a safe default, but there will always be specifics. And this is why, I'm not an attorney, and I'm certainly not anybody's attorney on this call. This is why you want to kind of get your legal team involved in these discussions, because that one, the day will come where that one does trump the other way. But if you're setting up just the general rule of thumb, records should trump a MISC request, forget me, please. And it's one of the reasons that you need to be so accurate in determining what is a record and what is not. Because if you're sloppy in that, that's going to give room. If the data subject wants to cause trouble, that's going to open the door for them to say, oh, well, you're not consistent with yourself. So now I'm going to claim whatever is the most lenient or lax approach towards data. That's what I want for all my data, records or otherwise. So be very careful about your consistency. And I know I'm kind of beating this drum, but again, that's one of the things that automated solutions have over people, which is they are by definition consistent. It might not be always 100% accurate, or it may need to be tweaked, but it will be consistent. And so you don't set yourself up for those kind of oopsies that nobody intended, or group over here is doing one thing and group over there is doing another, and now you've hurt each other.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Another question kind of along that same line, are there deletion exemptions in certain rules for GDPR or the California regulations that supersede a DSAR request to delete data? And I think kind of along the same lines, I think that would just be kind of top of mind right now would be legal hold, would be one of those ones that.
Well, legal hold for sure. Mm-hmm. Well, in the United States. In Europe, legal hold, that is really an open question. Legal hold versus DSAR, forget the records, third leg of the stool. If it's just legal hold versus DSAR in EU, there are certainly circumstances where the DSAR wins. In the US, legal hold wins against both, almost universally. Again, check with your counsel. One thing that is an interesting thing about what might prevent a deletion, even though the request has been made, is if there is more data than just the data subject on the document. I didn't mention this earlier, but let's say you have an employee list and you have all former employees and their salary level, okay? Boom, personal data right there, okay? So, and Joe Jones comes along and says, I want you to forget me. That doesn't mean you just throw that document away because Joe wanted it thrown away. What you might have to do is redact out Joe's information and keep the document. Ha ha ha. Also a lot of fun, which means you have to be able to identify the document, identify that Joe is on it, identify the document, identify that it contains personal data, that it contains Joe's personal data and everybody else's, and then only redact his. Again, I'm telling you, an automated solution is the way you want to do that. That is a lot of work for a human being to figure out every time a request comes in.
Mm-hmm. I see we're just at 1:59. There's a few more questions here, but I don't know if we have time to answer them, but if not, then we'll certainly follow up over email after the fact.
Lynn or Shelley, I'll direct that at you. Can we stay on a moment or no?
Yeah, why don't you answer one or two more and then we'll conclude after that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, the next one is, have you seen AI being used successfully in identifying and classifying unstructured data?
Yes, but you want very special type of AI, which is guided machine learning. That is what Valora uses, which is it's guided by a human being and then it kind of plays out. You want to be very careful of unguided AI, because that's your sorcerer's apprentice model where it just goes off and, God only knows what it's doing. You want to be very careful and very judicious in the application of AI. That itself is another whole topic. Whoever asked that question, feel free to email me. My email is here. I would love to have that conversation with you.
One last question I can see here in the chat. Does a DSAR have the right to know why if their data would be on legal hold?
Oh, what a good question.
Yeah. Because that would be a purpose of what it's being used for, held for.
Yeah. To be honest with you, I don't know. My instinct, again, this is just instinct, is no. They have a right to know that it is under legal hold, but I'm not convinced that you are required to tell them, for example, which legal hold or what responsive term put it under legal hold. I'm pretty sure those constitute work product, and you do not have to disclose. You're disclosing the purpose, it's under legal hold, you're not disclosing the rationale. And I'm pretty sure that's the answer. If there are any data privacy gods or goddesses on this call, would love to hear your answer to that one.
One other question here. Could records management be regarded as a basis for effective data privacy implementation?
Yes, yes, 1,000 times, yes. That is the whole idea. You guys walk the walk and can, just by example, show the rest of the organization how to do this. This is what I am constantly advocating. Go out there and take control of this area. This is how to build your empire, because you guys are already doing it properly. Yes. That's a good ending note.
That was a good one, yeah. I think that's all for questions that I can see anyways. If I have missed any, I'll certainly go back and get in touch with any that that we haven't been able to answer.
Okay. Great. What a great way to end a webinar. You guys are awesome. Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Sandy, for today's program. And thank you all for attending. We will have webinars coming up throughout the summer. For example, we have 2 with Contoural. One is on July 12th and the other is on August 9th. And you can check our website because we'll be announcing more webinars as time goes on. So go to mersapient.com and you'll see all the up-to-date listings of webinars. And also, if you've missed any of our webinars or you'd like to go back and revisit any of them, you can access that content on the website as well. So next slide, please. Thank you. To receive the up-to-date information on all of our various MER products, I invite you to join our mailing list by going to merconference.com, and you can scroll to the bottom of the page and do that. Also, please don't forget to take our brief survey. Your feedback is important to us, so we really appreciate you filling those out. So once again, thank you, Jen. Thank you, Sandy, for today's program. And thank you all for attending. I hope you'll all have a great remainder of the day, and we'll see you on the next MER Sapient webinar.
Great. Thanks so much.
Bye, everyone.